How to import animations with C++ in Unreal. Because, well, even though it's possible to import all the animations at the same time as the skeletal mesh, it's also possible to import the animation on top of an existing skeletal mesh, and that's also pretty useful, so that's what we're going to do today. So let's get to it. But before we get started, this video is going to reuse some code that we wrote in the video 3 of the series, so I strongly recommend to go see that one, but if you're not interested, this is how the code looks like. Okay, so as usual, I'm in a pretty empty header file, and we're going to add the new function that we're gonna use to import the animations. And now for the parameters of the function, so the import animations function is going to take 3 variables as input. So we have first the source path, which is the path of my FBX file that is on my computer somewhere, a FBX file that contains an animation. Then we have the destination path, so where we want to save the animation in the project. So the path to my animation file once it's imported in Unreal. And finally, we have the skeleton path because we want to be able to import the animation on top of an existing skeleton. We don't want to create a new skeleton for it. We really want to use an existing skeleton, and that's where we're going to specify which skeleton we want to use to import the animation in the project. And once the function is done processing the animation, we're going to return it at the end of the function. Right here we have the UAnim sequence, which is the asset type we're going to create by importing an animation in Unreal. And this new class right here is not defined anywhere before, so I'm just going to forward declare it right here at the top to make sure that it doesn't cause any issue during the compiling. Perfect. So now we're done with the header file, and it's time to jump in the CPP. And now in the CPP file, we're going to start with the includes. The first include we're going to include is the code from the previous video because we want to reuse it. And then we also want two other includes to be able to specify all the settings we need to feed to the import process to be able to process the animation properly. So to do that, we are going to need the FBX import UI and also the FBX anim sequence import data. Right here. Those two classes are inside the Unreal ED module, which is an editor-only module, but in our case, we don't really mind, but we have to make sure that this module is already included in the build.cs file. So let's go in the build.cs file quickly, and we can see that right here, I already have my Unreal ED module. So that's pretty good. Now we can jump back in the CPP file to focus on the logic of the function. And actually, it's going to be a pretty simple one since we did most of the logic in the previous video. So first, we just have to create the import task the same way we did before. So we have our nice task right here. Then we're just going to process the import task that we have right here. As output, that process import task is going to give us an asset. And in our case, we are interested to know if we really imported an animation. So I'm just going to cast it into a UAnim sequence right here that I have right there. And if the import worked and I have an animation sequence, I'm just going to return it right here at the end of the function. So yeah, so far it's pretty simple. The only difference is the option parameter right here, which we're going to use to tell the import process what to do with that FBX file. And to do that, well, we need to create the object first. So we need a new object right here of type UFBX import UI, and that's the object that contains all the different parameters that we're going to feed to the import process. These are all the same parameters that you see in Unreal when you drag and drop an FBX in Unreal and you try to import an animation using that FBX. So it opens a window with a bunch of settings in there, and that's all the settings we're going to set today in the code. So here it is. We have the import option window that we have right here, and we're going to set all those settings, and then we can feed that object to the import task so it knows what to do with the FBX file. And now for those options, the first batch of options we're going to set is all the options that's going to tell Unreal that we want to import an animation. So by default, the import process is going to detect automatically which import type we should do depending on what is inside the FBX file. But in our case, we don't want Unreal to decide for us. We want to specifically tell it to import an animation. So here I'm just going to set that variable to false so Unreal doesn't detect it for us. And then we're going to force it to import an animation right here. And that's what I'm doing right here. A mesh type to import is going to be the animation. And then I'm also going to specify that we really want to import the animations that are from the FBX. So the import type is going to be the animation, and we also want to make sure to import the animation, obviously. So good, Unreal now is going to import an animation. We just have to tell it where to import the animation, or actually which skeleton to use to import that animation. And that's what we're going to do right here. We're going to set the skeleton of the options that we have right here using the skeleton path that we receive as input. So I'm just going to load that skeleton right here. I'm going to try to load it. And since the static load object can load any type of asset, it can load a texture, a static mesh, skeletal mesh, or whatever, we have to make sure that we're really loading a skeleton because we can't really import an animation on top of a texture. That will not really make sense. So here I'm just casting it to a skeleton, putting it back inside the option skeleton right here, and then before continuing and telling Unreal to import the animation, I'm just going to also make sure that my skeleton is valid. So right here, if my skeleton is equal to null pointer, because let's say the path was invalid, or we use the path that was leading to a texture or static mesh or something else that is not a skeleton, the skeleton right here is going to be invalid, and we don't want to try to import the animation. That's just not gonna work. So here I'm just going to return because, well, the skeleton is not valid anyway, so we can't really import the animation using that skeleton. So good, now we're going to import an animation. We know which skeleton on which we want to import the animation, and the next step is just going to tell Unreal that we don't want to import anything else that comes with the FBX file, because it's possible that in the FBX you have a static mesh, skeletal mesh, animations, or anything else. So here I'm just going to tell Unreal, no, don't import anything else. Do I want to import a static mesh? No, I just want to import the animation. Same thing for the skeletal mesh. Do I want to import skeletal mesh? No, just the animation. Don't create a physics asset. Don't import the textures. Don't import the materials. Don't reset the materials. Doesn't really matter. Don't do anything with the LODs, and also don't override the animation name. That one you can actually modify it if you want. If you want to override the animation name, you can, but in my case I don't want to, so I'm just leaving it empty just like that. So it's just going to use the default name of my animations. And now it's time for the fun part. All the settings that you can set when you import an FBX in Unreal using the FBX import UI that you have in Unreal, the little window that opens. We're going to set all those settings right now. So I'm just going to scroll down a little bit because I know that there's a lot of settings and I have all of those. And as you can see right here, I'm just hard-coding all the values for today's video because I want to keep it a little bit shorter. But in your case, if you want to modify all those variables depending on which import you want to do, you can obviously feed all those parameters at the beginning of your function. So you can simply decide for all your different animation import which parameters to use. But in my case, I'm just keeping all these parameters right here, which are all the parameters that I want to use for today's import. And that's just because I want to keep this video a little bit shorter. So good. In your case, make sure to modify all those parameters to whatever you want for your project. But in my case, I'm just going to use all of those. And in those parameters, we have import translation, import rotation, import uniform scale, convert scene, force front x-axis, convert scene unit, import meshes in bone hierarchy, animation length, frame import range, use default sample rate, custom sample rate, snap to closest frame boundary, import custom attribute, delete existing custom attribute curves, delete existing non-curve custom attribute, set material drive parameter on custom attribute, remove redundant keys, delete existing morph target curves, do not import curve with 0, preserve local transform. And actually that's it. With all those parameters and everything, we're done with the CPP file and we're done with this function. Now we should be able to import any type of animation using all those settings, and that should work pretty nicely. So let's go in Unreal to test all that. So in Unreal, as usual, I created myself a small user interface to be able to test everything super quickly. So here I can specify which FBX on my computer I want to import, so the source path. We can also say where we want to save the animation in the project once it's imported. So I have my path right here, and finally which skeleton we want to use for that animation. So that's good. We have all the different paths, and when we click on import, it should feed all those paths to our function, and that's what we're doing in the graph right here. So here we are calling the import animation function, feeding it the source path, the destination path, and finally the skeleton path. So now we should be able to test all that super quickly. So let's go in Unreal and run the editor utility widget, and I have all my paths set up properly by default, so I can simply click on import and it should import the animation idle for us. And if I go in my test folder and I scroll down a little bit, we can see that this is the skeleton I'm using, the 7 chicken skeleton, which is right here, 7 chicken skeleton, and we're creating 8 chicken idle that we have right here. And since we can modify those paths, I can easily change the name of my animation that I want to create. I can add as many letters as I want, I can remove all those letters, and it's going to create a new animation file for us using those new names that we decided in the destination path. And then same thing, if I make a typo in my FBX file, the animation is not going to be able to be processed because my FBX file doesn't exist on my computer, obviously. And finally, if I do the same thing in the skeleton name, oops, I have to fix my FBX file. Here we go. In the skeleton name, I made a typo. So now if I try to import, it says that the skeleton is not valid because, well, that's not a valid skeleton because I made a typo in the name. Perfect. So now let's see how it looks. I'm going to open my animation and we can see that my chicken moves and it's animated properly. And on the left, we can see all the settings that we specified during the import. We can make sure that all those settings are exactly the same as the one we entered in the code. So perfect. I guess that's going to be it for today's video and I'm going to see you in the next one. Bye bye.